Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So today we're talking about Kendall Walton's metaphor and prop-oriented make-believe. In this article, Walton distinguishes between two different contexts, of make-believe. One that he calls prop-oriented and one that he calls content-oriented. He tells us, this is bottom page 239 of our text, a game may be cooked up simply to clarify or expose features of the props, simply so we can observe their role in it. This is make-believe in a service of the cognition of props. I call it prop-oriented make-believe, and I contrast it to content-oriented make-believe, whose interest lies in the content of the make-believe in the fictional world. So, imagine someone throwing around a frisbee, right? This is Walton's example, and they jokingly refer to it as a flying saucer or UFO, right? Or someone folds up a sheet of paper and throws it and calls it an airplane, right? So, as Walton concedes, most frisbee enthusiasts, right, aren't going to call a frisbee a UFO, but that's not the point. He tells us there's nevertheless a point in calling the paper constructions airplanes and the plastic discs flying saucers. These are convenient ways of indicating for those who know about airplanes and flying saucers what these toys are and how they work. The make-believe looks back toward the props themselves rather than forward to the fictional truths the props generate. It is prop-oriented. And then it goes on to note that paper airplanes and frisbees thus differ from such props as hobby horses, non-flying airplane models, etc., and the kind of toy trucks that a child pushes around on the floor. Merely manipulating or looking at these things is likely not to be much fun, although I would challenge that. I actually think that's kind of missing the point of it, making a model. You make the model to look at it. Nevertheless, one's interest in the make-believe to which they contribute in fictionally riding a horse or observing the Wright brothers' airplane or driving a truck, right? Well, that's one's interest lies in that. In these cases, make-believe looks forward to the content of the make-believe. It is content-oriented. So that's the distinction to be had here between prop-oriented and content-oriented, right? And okay, so what's this got to do with metaphors, right? Well, it can be illustrative and informative, right? To have these kinds of prop-oriented metaphors. Walton gives us these three examples, right? If you didn't know where the Italian town of let me find it here. Now, of course, Crotone. If you didn't know where it was, and someone told you, well, it's on the toe of the boot of Italy, then you would have an idea where to look, right? If you didn't know which particular cloud in a storm front looked like the one that was going to burst, right? Someone might say, oh, it's the angry looking cloud, right? So in that context, the metaphor is prop oriented and serves to drive your imagining or your envisioning a given phenomenon, right? He goes on to note, this is page 243, metaphors like saddle of a mountain, right? So a saddle is a high ridge that connects, a ridge that connects two high points, right, on a mountain range, are not dead in a sense that ought to make us deny that they are metaphors, so long as they remind us of the game of make-believe, familiar though it is, right? So again, these metaphors, that is, right, these prop metaphors have life insofar as they serve to illustrate a point or drive a story. And this differs again from the content metaphor, in that the prop metaphors look back toward the objects themselves to spur this kind of understanding. Here at the bottom of page 244, Walton tells us what metaphors do in many cases is to activate relevant dispositions or abilities rather than to make us aware of the principles of generation. When someone describes a writing style as having punch or a melody as unfolding, I cannot say very well what characteristics of a writing style or a melody make these metaphorical attributions appropriate. Which ones generate fictional truths about punches or about something's unfolding, but I may be prepared to recognize writing styles or melodies as having punch or as unfolding, right? So, again, the value of a metaphor is the same. It's akin to the value of an analogy, right? It serves to describe or familiarize us with the unfamiliar vis-a-vis term or in terms, excuse me, of the familiar. So if you're unfamiliar again with say rugby and I compare it to football, right? Or you're unfamiliar with cricket and I compare it to baseball. It serves again as an to illustrate the point and to you know grease the gears, if you will. There's a metaphor, right, of your imagination. So this last little bit, this is page 246, right? Walton tells us metaphors thus make things such as sunlight and the sea into something like representational works of art. It is the function of pictures, such as a Japanese painting, to serve as props in games of make believe. This is not in general the function of sunlight and the sea. In particular, social context, metaphorical utterances accord them this function. Sunlight and the sea are found objects, metaphors due to finding.